Welcome to Come Back with a Warrant.
Welcome back to Come Back with a Warrant with attorney Michael Gottlieb. The American legal system is built on a simple premise. You are innocent until proven guilty. But in the courtrooms of South Florida, that premise is challenged every single day. For 3 decades, Michael has stood between the state and the accused, litigating over 150 jury trials in state and federal courts, from the Florida legislature to the Broward courts defense bars. His work is centered on a single mission: protecting the constitutional rights that keep us free. Michael, let's bring some clarity to this conversation today. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
When someone realizes that they've been under investigation but hasn't been charged, what are the most common ways that situation actually comes to light?
So normally somebody will either receive a subpoena or they'll hear from a witness or somebody else who's involved, and they reach out. And the most common question is, well, if I hire an attorney, is that going to make me look guilty? And the answer is no, it doesn't make you look guilty. It makes you look like you're well informed. It makes you look like you're prepared. It makes you look like you understand that you have a Sixth Amendment right. Why would you ever want to speak with the government during an investigation without being properly armed? So there's many ways that somebody can receive information that they're under investigation, but it's always best to hire an attorney.
And what does it usually mean when law enforcement is building a case but hasn't filed charges yet?
So every case, there has to be probable cause to believe that the person committed the crime, and there has to be a reasonable likelihood of conviction. That reasonable likelihood of conviction is based on whether or not the state can meet the elements of the charge that they have. So as they're building a case, they might be trying to work in each and every one of those elements. We've talked before about, sort of how you build a case, and there's circumstantial evidence that as I look at it, sort of draws a circle. The government's trying to do the same thing. They're trying to complete that circle and ensure that they have the evidence to complete that circle. So when they're building a case, that's what they're doing. They're looking for direct evidence, indirect evidence, circumstantial evidence, whatever it is they have that connects those dots to prove that this person is guilty of the charges that they prefer to bring.
I understand the concept of that, Michael, but what actually is happening behind the scenes during the investigation that most of us don't ever see?
Sure. So I always talk in terms of the government, but let's break down who the government is. You've got numerous law enforcement agencies from local police to FBI, right? So you're going to have those government actors, agents, and it's always best for the attorneys when there's a lawyer involved on the other side. So let's say you have the U.S. attorney or somebody from a state attorney's office. And what they're doing is they're interviewing witnesses. They're issuing subpoenas. The subpoenas they could be issuing could be for cameras at a neighbor's house or at a mall, depending on where, this alleged crime happened. Could be for bank records. So what they're doing is they're gathering that kind of information. They're reviewing it. They're analyzing it. They're talking to witnesses. They're taking sworn statements. They are, as you said, building a case. And so that's kind of what happens behind the scenes. And that's why it's best to get to an attorney, because we can sort of start chipping away at the government's evidence early on and start talking to the prosecutor and offering mitigation. So they might also be building their aggravation. So aggravation are factors that tend to make somebody look worse. And let's say you've got a client who has a bad prior criminal history. So they're looking, should we habitualize this person? Should we try to seek a minimum mandatory penalty? All of that goes into the behind the scenes information when the government is looking to bring charges.
And then what has to happen before law enforcement decides to actually file charges?
Well, so that's interesting. It's not law enforcement who decides to file charges. It's the state attorney or U.S. attorney's office. Law enforcement can make an arrest. That arrest is typically based on probable cause, but it's still up to the prosecuting entity to determine whether or not they're going to seek an indictment in any criminal case. Now, I use the word indictment, but most cases today are filed by what's known as an information. And an information is a sworn affidavit, if you will, without impaneling a grand jury, that says this person is accused of committing this crime, and it's sworn to by the state attorney.
So there's a lot of legal terms here, and I continue to use law enforcement. So correct me if I'm wrong on this one as well. How often do people unknowingly give law enforcement what they need to move the case forward? And perhaps it's not law enforcement that they're talking to at that point.
Well, so that also brings up a really interesting concept. There are predator hunters out there now. So for instance, I handle a lot of sex offense cases, and there's these groups that literally trap people, right? They start an online sex conversation with the person, they get them to meet, and then they liaison to law enforcement. Law enforcement could be that you're dealing with a confidential informant or what's known as a decoy. So law enforcement is an incredibly nebulous concept in today's age. Law enforcement also, if you're committing a crime on the internet, so using some kind of social media site, they're also going to liaison with law enforcement. So it that definition is broader. Actual law enforcement officers are officers who are sworn and impaneled to serve and protect, right? That's their job. And part of what they do is investigate crimes. You should know if you're dealing with a law enforcement officer. Once they are investigating you and talking to you face to face and trying to get you to make admissions, they are supposed to identify themselves as law enforcement. That's not to say they can't engage in undercover operations.
That makes sense. And then what kinds of interactions with law enforcement tend to create the biggest problems before charges are ever filed?
Well, so, like I was just talking about, you have undercover, right? So I have all the time, I represent a lot of people who are accused of dealing in drugs, and they don't realize it, but they'll be in the back seat of a car handing drugs forward. And literally, I just had a case where there were four cameras in the car. It caught every single angle. It caught the guy getting in the car. It caught the officer reaching back like this and receiving the drugs. It caught the confidential informant in the front seat. So anytime that you're engaging in some kind of hand-to-hand transaction, you can expect that you might be on video. Um, Anytime you're with law enforcement, anything you say is going to be an admission. Even if you're silent, that's technically, they're going to look at an admission. That silence cannot be used against you. But anytime you're with law enforcement, you can expect that what you're doing, what you're saying is being monitored, especially in today's age where officers have body worn cameras. You can expect you're being monitored and it's going to be used against you.
And there are cameras everywhere. We can't get out of the sight line of cameras. So we have to be on guard all the time. Uh, how how does that affect, the criminal component in the prosecution of these cases? You have so much more access to evidence with all the technology today.
What I'm finding is very often law enforcement. So I've got some great cases right now. One is an allegation of murder, the other is an allegation of aggravated battery with serious bodily injury. And they're both caught on video. In particular, those two cases, I'm likely going to be able to use the video that we have to show that my client was being threatened. My client was acting in self defense. My client stood his ground. There's are two separate cases, but then in each individual case, those videos are going to help me. I've had cases thrown out because law enforcement claims they searched the car and found something in plain view. And when you analyze that video, you find that no, it really wasn't in plain view. So I think the video it helps. I also have cases where it's absolutely terrible. I've got a guy who
Right.
chased somebody down, shot him in the back on video, right? Not a very good scenario to be in. So it helps and it hurts.
And what are the signs that investigation is getting serious and charges may be coming?
Law enforcement wanting to speak to you face to face. You'll hear from your neighbors, friends, witnesses, alleged victims. When you can feel the heat, right? And I've had clients saying, "Look, there's law enforcement sitting outside my house and they're following me." You know, that those kind of indications, you'll know it when you see it. It's that kind of feeling that you'll literally know it when you see it.
And I'm kind of curious, I don't know if this is even possible, but how does getting an attorney involved early change the direction of an investigation?
Well, it absolutely can because, so for instance, I have a case where a lady says my client attacked her. Well, they went shopping together. And she claims he attacked her and then they went shopping. Well, we got the video from them shopping. They're walking around, they're very friendly. It's not a kidnapping case. There's no, she was free to leave. They went and had dinner. By my early intervention and being able to get that video will likely exonerate my client. Whereas if the client didn't get to us early on, the opportunity to have received that video diminishes because it depends on whether or not the store, which is a retail store in this case, whether or not they keep it for a week, a month, or a year. So the early intervention with the lawyer was incredibly beneficial to this client.
Michael, here's where I want to wrap this up today. I'm curious what separates investigations that turn into charges from those that don't?
There's no real hard and fast rule. Sometimes the investigation just doesn't have the right evidence to suggest that a charge should be brought. Sometimes it's that early intervention that we've been talking about, where the lawyer I can find witnesses that the government hasn't been able to find. I can find evidence that the government hasn't been able to find. And it's the ability to bring that information to the government, whether it's the state attorney, or it's the U.S. attorney, but the ability to bring it there and create a dialogue and show why their perspective is wrong. They always believe their case until you're able to show them it's not quite as righteous as you think. So that's really the best way. Attack them and attack them early.
Well said. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Folks, that's it for today's episode of Come Back with a Warrant. For more resources, notable case results, or to schedule a consultation regarding your specific situation, visit browardcriminallawyer.com. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe to the show, and leave us a review if you found this episode helpful. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.